Come back. Arthur, China.
Yes.
China went down to Iran with a big naval fleet just to have a look at what Trump was doing. I think they're onto something. I think they're worried about their oil supplies. What do you think?
Iran is a supplier to China, but the Chinese are very conscious of becoming as self-reliant as they can be across a whole range of industries, because they realise that that's their best bet to be able to resist the US if the US ever decided to move against them in some way. It's just part of their philosophy to be more independent. So they will be processing what's happening in Iran at the moment, both in terms of the energy situation, but also American military and how they're operating, and they'll take lessons out of that when they think about how the US might operate in their theatre. Some people say that Trump is also using what's happening here as a warning shot to China and maybe Russia. I think you can separate the issues. He's got a different sort of relationship with China and with Russia than the one he sort of had or didn't have with Iran. With China, his main game is economics and trade. He wants to beat China at economics and trade and at tech. He wants to dominate tech, like new areas like AI. But he's not as hawkish on China as some of his advisors and some others in the Republican Party and the Congress. So there's a big summit which is still programmed for late March, early April between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, and that'll be in China. Trump is looking for major concessions from the Chinese around trade and economics. I don't think he wants the Iran war to imperil that summit. Some people have said, where does this leave issues like security and Taiwan? Well, in Trump's mind, I think they're all separate. Like his brief for Taiwan, it's a bit ambiguous at the moment as to where he stands on Taiwan. And in the past, US policy has been a bit ambiguous to leave the Chinese guessing. But at the moment, you'd have to say that his main interest in the China relationship is trade and economics. The Chinese may well try and offer him a grand bargain on economics and trade, and in return say, give us more of a free hand on security in our region, South China Sea, Taiwan. I don't know that even if the president were inclined to accept that, whether people in the US administration or the Congress would support that. So question mark on that. With Russia, he wants to normalise the situation with Russia, take sanctions off them. So I'm not sure that he's using Iran to send a warning signal to the Russians. In fact, if anything, he got a bit defensive when people raised the idea that the Russians might be supplying intelligence to Iran to target American assets. Yeah. He didn't want to go there. Yeah. But with China, he's conscious that China continues to rise, even though they've got their own economic issues. And technologically, they're continuing to invest heavily. They want to be more independent of the West. And in return, what Trump is doing is trying to make the West more independent of China in areas like critical minerals, the sort of stuff like lithium and others, which is important for batteries, magnets, defense material, etc.
And weapons.
And defense material that goes into weapons. And Australia is part of that. So there are a lot of areas where Trump is trying to make the West and America more independent of Chinese supply chains. But to where we started before, Trump is very much about America first, and therefore a lot of this is about how he further increases American power and prosperity.
And there's a lesson there for us, though, isn't there? I mean, Australia, with all the natural resources we have, has only got 2 oil farms. And at the moment, we are suffering immeasurably cost of living, high power, high energy costs, petrol's going up by the day, and yet one of the richest, most resourceful countries in the world, and we don't have our own petrol. Is there something wrong?
You're talking there also about fuel storage, because a lot of our fuel storage is now offshore. And that is an issue, and it's been highlighted recently by this sort of conflict, because what we're possibly going to see now is oil prices and gas prices go even further up. Now there's swings and roundabouts. Australia is a big gas producer, so we will benefit from very high gas prices. In fact, there's some people in Australia saying we should be taxing some of that increase in pure profit that's coming through. But to your point more broadly, oil prices are going up in Australia, and that's going to exacerbate the energy situation we've got here. Energy availability could be further impacted, so it's a bit of a double hit. And so cost of living and affordability issues become impacted even further. So the fuel storage thing then becomes an issue about, should we have a sovereign capability in fuel storage?
That's my point.
And there are some investors in Australia who are now looking at the economics of more gas storage in Australia, for example, and tapping more of our gas in particular, because that's like a transition fuel. It's not as emitting as oil, but it's a good transition fuel, but it's available. There's lots of it now. But Australia would benefit probably from an all of the above energy approach, which is what the Chinese have and the Americans have, which is they're exploiting to your point earlier, all of their energy sources, so that you get both energy security, energy affordability, as well as cleaner energy along the way.
But we would hopefully on the East Coast want the same deal as the Western Australian people had on gas, where the people in Western Australia are covered.
And there's been talk about an East Coast reservation scheme. Correct. By the current government, and that's fine, as long as we can do it in such a way that we get the benefit of both exporting where we can to get the high prices overseas, as well as having abundant energy domestically. And the way to do that is to further develop the energy resources we've got here. So in the case of gas, it means that states which have moratoria on gas exploration, extraction and development should take those off, and we should be maximising our energy development. We've got some interesting gas energy developments in Northern Territory, in Queensland, and we've got to look at all of that, because if we just focus on doing what we're doing now, the problem is the wheels are coming off that transition. We're putting more and more high renewable energy targets at a time when the ability to meet those targets is being crimped by what's happening in terms of availability of labour, supply chains, infrastructure. So we need more of a transition, and the government, they may not be shouting it from the rooftops, they basically acknowledge that gas has got to be a big part of that transition.
But nuclear has to be a part of that conversation, surely.
Well, and I think in the last election there was an opportunity to talk about nuclear, not just in the context of energy broadly, but also in the context of attracting data centres to Australia, which require a lot of energy and a lot of water. Yeah. And now we're a nice, stable place to do data centres. Like the UAE and parts of the Gulf want to do that, but at the moment they're under attack. So there's a bit of a view that, well, if you want to have a stable place to do this, Australia is, in this geopolitical moment, is one of the places to do it. But to do that, you've got to have abundant energy and water. People are trying to find ways to economise on how much the data centres use, but in the end it is, you're right, you need more base load power, right? And that's where nuclear potentially comes in. And so nuclear can provide you with clean power, energy, more energy abundance, and potentially, and therefore energy security. Energy affordability, I mean, there are high capital costs at the beginning, but then the marginal costs tail off. But as a country, public-private capital to do this, we can do this. So Australia, to your point, have a lot of options. The question is whether we have a master plan to exploit all those options.
See, my problem, and comes to your question about nuclear, is how important is political philosophy, in the sense that Labor and Liberals' philosophy on the economy overcomes the national interest. Our national interest is to provide our people with food, with power, with resources.
Defence.
Defence. All these things, yet they're being hampered by the philosophy. Green energy that we can't afford. All these things that are coming into play that are basically stopping us from using nuclear, from using all our resources,
but that's that
from
folly.
Refining our own oil.
I agree, but that's that folly that they had with that gold mine that was going to bring billions of dollars over a bee from an Aboriginal tribe that brought this up, that then said this was not true.
Well, this is what I'm saying. At the end of the day, when does the national interest take over from these stupid...
Well, I think to your point, regulation, and people are looking to reduce red tape in Australia, but we've got to realise we've got to benchmark ourselves, because other countries are potentially doing more to reduce red tape, or they're doing more to attract investment. So we're in a world where capital is very flexible and mobile. So the challenge for Australia is to have sort of best in practice, best in breed, best of breed, regulation, technology and everything else if you're going to attract people and attract investment and capital to this country. So we're not an island. We are an island, but we can't assume we can just cut ourselves off from the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah.
And that's my point. I mean, the natural interest should come first, shouldn't it? You know, we can't be losing, taking backward steps because of some philosophy that the Labor Party have, or the Liberal Party
Or
have,
the Greens.
or the Greens, or whoever. You know, we vote these governments in to be able to help us survive, to get jobs, to raise our families, to keep our culture alive. And this is all being hampered, isn't it?
Well, that's
So-
the reason of Pauline Hanson's success at the moment.
Well, because she's providing
And she's been very clear and focused on one or two major issues.
Absolutely.
The challenge for her is that she's never run a government, so it's a different proposition to when you have to run a government. So to your point, you're right, things have to be prioritised, and the art of government is how you square the circle like that. And the way you square the circle is you go at the public, you communicate your priorities, and then you argue your case. People say, oh, it's harder now with social media and everything else. Sure, you have to adapt to the new media environment that you're in, but it doesn't stop what you need to do. Like in the Howard government, there were lots of issues where you just had to stand in the marketplace, in the public space, argue your case, and stand your ground. And you know, ultimately, people will respect you if they believe you're doing this for the right reasons.
Let's remember that, the great man John Howard, and come back to all this. So we'll have a break. Let Arthur have a cup of coffee, maybe one of your sweets here, Vinny. We'll be back. But comment on what's being said, troll us, do whatever you like, connect with us, but stay with us.